All right, guys. So this is going to be your first podcast for anatomy and physiology. And today we're going to talk about the orientation to the human body. So let me just get our slideshow set up here. And you should have printed this PowerPoint out. So hopefully you have it in front of you and you have your book in front of you and you can take some notes. You can follow along in the book. I'm going to show you probably a couple of videos from Davis Plus. So those are the things that I would have handy while we're going through each chapter as we make our way through this course. I'm hoping to keep these videos pretty short and concise, and then when I see you on Thursdays, we can go into greater detail if you need to. So Thursdays will be the time where you really bring your questions, your concerns, and ask me, hey, Ms. Turner, can we talk more about the different planes of the body? Because that's something you're struggling with. So I don't want this to be like hours and hours and hours of videos. Now, some weeks, of course, it's going to be a little bit more than others, but I want to keep them nice and short so you can listen to them, hopefully in one time period, and move on and do other things related to, helping you to really understand the content. So like I said, we're in chapter 1 here. This is orientation to the human body. We're going to talk a little bit about what does anatomy and physiology really even mean. So anatomy is the study of the structures of the body. So you would talk about the bones, you would talk about the muscles, you would talk about the different structures of the face, the different structures of the respiratory system. And physiology is the study of how the body functions. So how do the bones function? How do muscles actually move? Versus anatomy is really where you just kind of memorize the different bones or muscles. And the physiology part of it is actually how that body part functions. So that's what this whole entire course is going to be about, which certainly is the basis for nursing. We have to understand how the body works appropriately and normally and in good health before we can talk about what's called the pathophysiology. And the pathophysiology is when the body or the structures are not functioning appropriately. So here we'll talk about the norms, and then when you start semester 2 or right at the end of semester 1, you're going to start talking about different disorders and diseases, and that's really the pathophysiology of the body. The book is going to talk about very typical function, but we all should know that not everyone is the same, right? So you can look at somebody and know not everyone is the same. So the book, just remember always that the book is talking about very typical. So the majority of the population, how their body functions and the structures of their body. But we know there's people out there who only have one kidney, or they have, missing digits sometimes, or they have extra digits, or whatever it may be. We know that there is people or structures that are different. So first I want to touch base on the organization of the body. So it's really arranged in a hierarchy. Does everyone know what a hierarchy means? So really means, going from simple to very complex. The human body really consists of trillions of different atoms, and thousands of different chemical reactions are happening simultaneously. But the organization of the body really flows from simple to very complex. So you do need to understand this for the examination, and really just to understand that atoms really are kind of the smallest part. They link together to form molecules, which we're going to talk more about in the next chapter. Molecules come together and along with organelles, and they all are part of a cell. So molecules make up cells, organelles are inside cells. So it's kind of a progressing complexity there. Organelles form the cells, like I said, and the cells are really the smallest living units that make up the body's structure. So it's important that we understand that. Then cells group together to form tissues, and then tissues come together to form organs. Organs come together, multiple organs come together to form organ systems. And then, of course, all the organ systems together is what really makes the human organism, or us, right? So there's 11 different organ systems, and you do need to understand each of these. And I'm going to go through what you really need to know about them. So you need to know what they are made up of, for this example, the integumentary system is skin, hair, and nails. And then you need to know some of the key functions. So the key functions of the integumentary system are protection. So our skin really, and our nails and our hair all protect us to some degree, but most importantly, our skin protects us. And they're also, one of their key functions is temperature regulation. So when we sweat or perspire, that helps us to regulate our temperature, which we'll talk more about. They also play a role in sensation, right? Skin has receptors in it that are going to allow us to feel hot, cold, pain, different surfaces. The skeletal system, and each of these systems are really going to talk more about in greater detail. So this is really just, kind of the basis. And then most of these we're going to talk about in their own different sections. So the next system is the skeletal system. It really consists of bones, cartilage, and ligaments. Okay, there's a nice picture there that's showing you our skeletal system. Some of the key functions of the skeletal system are protection of body organs. Right, our ribs do a really good job of protecting some of our vital organs in our chest. Support, movement, and blood formation. I think probably support and movement everyone understands because we live with that every day. But blood formation, sometimes people don't know, and the bone marrow that's produced in some of our long bones is where blood formation happens. So the bone marrow actually produces some of our blood cells. The muscular system is made up of the skeletal muscles and tendons. Key functions of the muscular system shouldn't be any surprise, mostly movement and posture, right? We need our muscles to move. We've probably all seen people that have had some sort of disease or disorder where their muscles aren't working appropriately, or maybe ourselves, we've had some sort of muscle spasms or some issues with our muscles and we know that it didn't work very well. The lymphatic system is a system that probably a lot of people aren't really familiar with. It is consisting of our lymph nodes, our lymphatic vessels, lymph, which is a fluid, the thymus, the spleen, and the tonsils. And their primary job within our body is they really play a vital role in fluid balance and production of immune cells. So they play a great role in our immunity, and then they help us to regulate our fluid so they can pick up excessive fluid throughout our body and get it back into our vascular system. The respiratory system is next. So the respiratory system consists of the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. So all the way from here down into the lungs. And again, like I said, we're going to talk about each of these systems in greater detail. What I really want you to understand is the system and some of the key functions of the system. And the biggest key function of the respiratory system is oxygen and carbon dioxide being exchanged. So that happens mostly in our lungs, and that's how we get oxygen into our body and how we get carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, out of our body. We exhale it out into the environment. The urinary system's next. The primary parts of the urinary system are the kidneys. So we have 2 kidneys, we have 2 ureters, 1 bladder, 1 urethra. The male urinary system also plays a part in the male reproductive system because the urethra goes through the penis, which that part of the urethra in the penis shares some of its function with the male reproductive tract, which again, we'll talk about in greater detail. The urinary system's biggest role really is excretion of waste. So that's what comes out as urine. But it also plays a role in blood volume and blood pressure because our kidneys can help us to get rid of more water, which will change our blood pressure and our blood volume. The nervous system is the brain, the spinal cord, the peripheral nerves, and the sense organs. Primarily, we're talking about the brain and the spinal cord. And then all of these nerves we have throughout our body send signals back and forth to the brain and spinal cord, which then help us to regulate and control other systems. So we know that if we touch a hot surface, there is a signal that's sent from our finger to our brain that quickly then tells our muscular system to contract and pull our hand away from whatever it's touching that's hot. And the nervous system also plays a role in memory. The endocrine system is a pretty complex system. It's going to be a pretty in-depth system that we talk about. but its primary function is hormone production. If you look at some of the things that the endocrine system is made up of, the pituitary gland, the adrenals, pancreas, thyroid, parathyroids, even if you didn't know what those are, most of us probably know what the ovaries and the testes are, and we know that they have a huge role in hormone production throughout our body. So when we get to this system, we'll talk about all the different hormones, we'll talk about all the different ways that the endocrine system works. The circulatory system is our heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. So it goes throughout our entire body, and the key functions of the circulatory system really are distribution of oxygen, so it takes oxygen that we breathe in, and it takes it out to the rest of the tissues of our body. It also plays a role in fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Again, this is a pretty complex system, and we'll get into more detail of that later. The digestive system is the stomach, small and large intestines, the esophagus, the liver, the mouth, and the pancreas. So we kind of go all the way from the beginning all the way to the rectum, which is at the end of the GI tract, and then the liver and the pancreas are in there as well. Probably most people know what the key function of the digestive system is, as it plays the biggest role in the breaking down of our food and the absorption of nutrients, and then, of course, elimination of waste. The male reproductive system is made up of the testes, the vas deferens, the prostate, the seminal vesicles, and the penis. Key functions here: production and delivery of sperm and secretion of testosterone, which is a sex hormone. So we have hormone production. We also have sperm, which plays a role in the reproductive cycle. We have the female reproductive system, which consists of ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, vagina, and breasts. So multiple places in the body. Its key functions are production of eggs, site of fertilization and fetal development. So unlike the male reproductive system, where it just is responsible for sperm production, which plays a role in fertilization of the egg, the female reproductive system actually is what also has to be the site of fertilization and fetal development, then birth, lactation, and secretion, again, of sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So those are the systems. So I need you to know all of those 11 systems. I need you to know the system name and the key functions of the system. Hopefully most of the pieces of the system we're at least slightly familiar with. I also need you to understand that all of our cells or organ systems are kind of our bodies in a hierarchy from simple to complex. And now we're going to get into some anatomic terms, and this is just going to be a lot of memorization. We're going to do a lot of activity with this next week. So I want you to definitely understand these terms, and then hopefully, or at least, kind of memorize the definitions of these terms, and then hopefully we can solidify your understanding of these terms when you come and see me and Miss Palmer. So I want to talk first about directional terms. These are grouped in pairs of opposites. So of course we have right and left. I'm not going to really go into much detail about that. Medial and lateral, though, are a couple of terms we definitely need to understand. Medial being towards the midline of the body, and you can see that it's this section here right down the middle. So medial would be towards the midline. Lateral means away from the midline. Okay. And then we have distal and proximal. So distal is away from and proximal is towards. Most often when we talk about distal and proximal, we're talking about two different places in the body. So we'll talk about the fact that the toes are distal to the knee. So in kind of talking about where the leg is attached to the body. So if we're ever talking about a limb and we're talking about distal proximal, we always want to reference to the fact that the kind of the point of origin that we're referencing to is the point of attachment. So if we're talking about the knee and we're talking about the toes, then we can say that the toes are distal to the knee in relation to this part here, or that point of attachment. Okay? The same with the arm then. You could say that the fingers are distal to the elbow, or the elbow is proximal to the fingers in relation to this point of attachment. If you're talking about areas on the trunk of the body, then you want to use the belly button as the point of reference. When we're talking about anatomic terms, it's really important that we always understand, too, that we're always referring to people in the anatomical position. The anatomical position is people standing erect, which means standing straight up with arms at their sides, with their face, palms, and feet facing forward, just how this person in this picture here is looking. Okay, so a couple more terms here, superior and inferior. So inferior is downwards, superior is upwards. So again, important that we understand those terms and we understand the definitions. So superior being above, inferior being below. Superficial meaning at or near the body's surface. So we talk about a superficial injury. It's maybe like a paper cut, right? Very superficial, just down a few layers into the skin, versus a deep injury, which means away from the body surface, would be a large incision where they went, had to really open up the leg and do some deep cutting or instrumentation to the leg. Anterior or ventral is towards the front of the body, and posterior or dorsal is towards the back of the body. So we'll talk about differentiating places on the body, and those are two terms that are going to be used very, very often. So it's really important that you understand these anatomical terms, so later on when we're talking about different places and I say on the anterior section of the body, you'll know that means on the front side of my body. Body planes, there's 3 different body planes that I want you to know. So the first one is the sagittal plane. That's a plane that divides the body lengthwise into right and left sides. So if we cut somebody open like that, you would see into the cavities of their body. It's not very often, I would say, do we look at images or diagnostic testing this way, because this is why you would need to know these planes is when we talk about doing CAT scans or x-rays. You want to know, well, how is this looking inside the body? Is it looking at the body divided into left and right halves? Or is it looking at a transverse plane, which means the body is divided into an upper section and a lower section, and there's kind of slicing it that way. This is really how a CT scan looks. So when you look at images of a CT scan, you'll be able to see, you kind of start from the top and go down, and you see the progression into the body. I will, let me actually pull up a picture here of a CT scan. That'll help to differentiate things a little bit more for you. Let's look at some images here. Here's a good one right here of the brain or the head. This is kind of easy for us to differentiate. And you can see how this is slicing it on a transverse plane. So here we have the eyes and the nose, and this is taking sections going down the brain in a transverse plane. Versus if we took, we had a sagittal plane, it would cut right here from the nose to the back. But that's not how we want to see it. We always want to look kind of at the brain going down. So this is always how a CT scan is going to kind of slice the body. So the last plane I want to talk about is the frontal plane, and that divides the body lengthwise into anterior and posterior portions, so the front side and the back side. Not the most common plane. I would say the most common plane that we talk about is the transverse plane. But I do want you to understand the 3 of these and be able to differentiate. Next, I want to talk about some different body regions, and there's a lot of body regions on here, but I'm going to point out which exactly ones I want you to know. So I want you to put a star next to the ones I'm about to list off so that you know exactly which ones you're responsible for knowing right now. Axillary or the armpit is the first one. Brachial or arm is the second one. Antecubital or front of the elbow is the third one. Palmar or palm is the fourth one. Femoral or thigh is the next one. Then I want you to know pedal down at the foot. I also want you to know the difference between the pelvic and the pubic region. And then on the picture of the person, if you're looking in your book, it's the next diagram here. I want you to know sacral, perineal, and then plantar. Okay, so those are the ones that you're going to be responsible for knowing and that you will potentially be tested on. Ms. Palmer is going to do an activity focused around this. All right, guys, so let's think about this question for just a second. Rachel has a cut on her leg just above her ankle. These are what your questions are going to kind of look like. Some of them are just going to be regurgitation of information on the exam and very factual based, but some of them are you're going to have to really think about. Okay, so Rachel has a cut on her leg just above her ankle. The injured area is, so cut on her leg just above her ankle. Okay, so everyone can picture where that is on the body. The injured area is distal to her knee, proximal to her knee, anterior to her knee, or medial to her knee. Now, hopefully we can think a bit about this and immediately rule out C and D. We don't usually talk about two positions, anterior to something or medial to something. We usually talk about this as a very common distal proximal type thing. So now we just have to discern, is it distal to her knee or proximal to her knee? Remembering the point of origin is the connection of the leg, so all the way up at the hip. So is the cut on her leg that's above her ankle farther away from her knee in terms of the point of origin or closer to the point of origin? So hopefully we all can think about that and understand that that cut is distal to her knee. So it's farther away from the point of origin. The point of origin, again, is the hip. Okay. A cut anterior to the knee would be on the front of the knee, and a cut medial to the knee would be on the inside portion of the knee. So those terms often aren't used like this. So if you see something that's talking about one point to the next, more often than not, they're going to be talking about proximal distal. So let's get into the body cavities. So there's two main cavities we have to know. We have to know the ventral cavity, which is the front cavity, and we have to know the dorsal cavity, which is the rear cavity. The dorsal cavity is pretty easy. It really just houses the cranial cavity and the spinal cavity. So it really houses the brain and the spinal cord. The ventral cavity, on the other hand, is then divided into two smaller cavities, the thoracic cavity, abdominal pelvic cavity. That then is further divided into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. So the ventral cavity really covers most of our chest region and our front abdominal region and everything that's located inside of it. So what might be some of the things that are located inside of the ventral cavity? Certainly in the thoracic cavity, we have the heart and lungs, right? As this diagram is going to show you, it's kind of divided up a little bit more. So the thoracic cavity here has the pleural cavities, which is going to be the lungs. The mediastinum is there between the lungs, and we have the heart here. The abdominal cavity then is going to house most of our abdominal organs, our stomach, our liver, our small intestines, our large intestines, those types of things. And then our pelvic cavity is going to contain some of the reproductive organs and the bladder. So the heart is located where? I'll give you a second to think about this. So hopefully we realize that that's the mediastinum. That's really the area that's kind of in between the lungs. So the other part of that ventral cavity there, or the thoracic cavity, which is part of the ventral cavity, is the pleural cavities, and those contain the lungs. The abdomen is also divided into quadrants. So I don't need you to really understand what's in those quadrants just yet. We talk about that later at a later date, but I do want you to just kind of in a general sense know that in healthcare often we talk about the abdomen in quadrants. So you'll hear people refer to the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant, and you'll see those initials or abbreviations, RUQ, used very frequently in progress notes. So it's important that we know those and that that's somewhat familiar to us. The last section of this chapter talks about homeostasis. So the beginning part of this chapter really was a lot of terms, a lot of definitions, and then homeostasis really is the larger concept here. And really what homeostasis means is that our body is in this state of dynamic equilibrium. And we're constantly trying to keep it in this range, right? One definition that your book talks about, and this is a discussion board question as well, is the internal temperature of our body. So we want our internal body temperature to remain between 97 and 99 degrees, despite how cold or hot it is outside. So how does our body do that? Well, there's a lot of different ways in which our body does that. I just want you to kind of understand this in a general sense and know that when we talk about things later down the road, I refer to homeostasis and I refer to negative feedback, what that really means. But there's a lot of things, not just internal temperature. There's fluid volume, there's chemicals in our body, there's different levels of electrolytes that our body has to keep in constant control. You might think about it a little bit like if you drink a lot of water, how does your body know that we don't need all that water and that we get rid of it? So we hold on to what we need, we get rid of what we don't need. So that's our body kind of constantly trying to create this state of homeostasis. Homeostatic regulation involves a receptor, which the receptor then detects a change. It involves a control center, which is an area of the body that receives and processes information from the receptor, and an effector. So that sends a signal back that either opposes or enhances the stimulus. So there's the three main things involved, right? The receptor detects a change. It sends a message to the control center, which processes the information and sends it to the effector, which then says, okay, we're going to either oppose or enhance that original stimuli that came from the receptor. Negative feedback is when the effector opposes the stimuli and reverses the direction of change, versus positive feedback is when the effector reinforces the stimuli and amplifies the direction of change. There's a couple of different examples of this, but most often we're always going to be talking about negative feedback. It's the more common type of homeostatic regulation. Positive feedback isn't very common. I'll give you one example of that, and that's in childbirth. So when a woman goes into labor, her uterus is contracting, okay? And we want it to contract harder and harder and harder to be able to push the baby out. Well, that's when that uterus is contracting, it's actually sending a stimuli to say we need more oxytocin. Oxytocin in turn then causes greater contractions of the uterus. So you can see how that system there, that pathway there, made the stimuli greater, it amplified it. Versus negative feedback, which is kind of the most common. One example that we'll talk about here is your home heating system. So a falling temperature signals the thermostat, right? We all set the thermostat at a different point. I keep my house pretty cold because I'm a big believer in blankets and sweatshirts in the wintertime or a heated blanket. So I keep my thermostat maybe around 65 in my house. Other people might keep it higher than that, but we set it, right? So that's kind of the set point, right? If the temperature falls below that, what happens? Our furnace kicks on, generates heat, it raises the temperature of the house, okay? And then what happens? The temperature goes back up, gets above 65 degrees, and the thermostat shuts off. It stops telling the furnace to keep generating heat. That temperature falls back below, and it kicks on again, and it heats the house up again to 65, and we continually are in this negative feedback. What happens, that same kind of system happens in our body to control temperature. So the outside temperature falls, temperature receptors in the skin send a message to the brain. The hypothalamus sends nerve impulses to the muscles shiver, and the body temperature raises. Body temperature gets back up to where we want it, between that 97 and 99 degrees, and the hypothalamus tells the muscles to stop shivering till that temperature drops back down again. Okay, so we're going to go on to Davis Plus here, and I'm going to show you where you can find some of the resources. All of these are embedded in Blackboard as well, but I want to just show you for a minute how you can find them online as well. So you have to register your book, I believe. I can't remember. You have to look in the front of your book, or it's on the back of your book. Hold on, I'm looking right now. It's on the back of your book. So you can just go to the website, and then it'll walk you through how to get this set up. So Davis Plus, then I'm already a member, so I'm just going to log in. Hopefully this works. Sometimes I forget my password. Just give it a second here. Oh, let's try this one more time here. Maybe I spelled something wrong. All right. Looks like it's taking us into my locker. So I have lots of different options here, but you're going to probably just have a few of these options depending on how many of your books you add to your locker. And you'll have student resources. And under here you have lots of different things. Body language is going to be different types of review activities, interactive exercises. Mostly what I'm going to show you during some of our lectures is animations. These are nice little videos that show some of these different, more complex systems, okay? So I'm going to show you the one on negative feedback. And these are great so you can watch them over and over again. It's going to explain it slightly different than how I explained it. And so it'll just give you a different perspective, hopefully.
When the pituitary gland stimulates another endocrine gland to secrete its hormone, that hormone is then fed back to the pituitary, telling it to stop further release of the tropic hormone. This process is called negative feedback. Negative feedback loops are used extensively to regulate hormones in the hypothalamic pituitary axis. The regulation of body temperature illustrates the negative feedback process. When body temperature decreases, the hypothalamus is stimulated to release thyrotropin-releasing hormone, or TRH. In turn, TRH stimulates the anterior pituitary to release thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. TSH stimulates the thyroid to release thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones stimulate metabolism, increasing warmth. At the same time, the increased thyroid hormone inhibits release of TSH by the pituitary. This is an example of negative feedback.
So you can watch this as many times as you want. This is just provides a little bit of a different example. Sometimes if you're really struggling with a concept too, go out on Google. Anatomy and physiology hasn't really changed a lot. So there's lots of good resources out there. There's lots of good YouTube videos out there. And then, of course, we're going to spend some time in class. So you can come and have a conversation with me. You can try to make an appointment with me so that we can sit down together one-on-one. I will be available at school most days, 11 to 11:30. And then I'm going to have some virtual office hours via Blackboard Instant Messaging on Wednesday evenings. So there's lots of ways to get kind of in touch with me. So that's going to conclude our first podcast on the organization and orientation to the body.